right, so we've talked about responsive units, responsive grids. Responsive grids is essentially what we've been doing, which is working with grids, okay? We've used CSS grids. Basically, all you really need to know with grids is make a grid. I'm gonna make a grid real quick. So grids. And I'm just going to make a container. Okay. And essentially, as long as the grid is based on percentages, it's going to be responsive. So you want to have a grid and you want it based on percentages. So I'm going to take this div and let's make it into a grid like we've done before for homework. Grid template columns. And I'm going to say repeat 3 1FR, one fraction. So there you go. Okay. That's pretty much it. So I'm not going to go over that. We've done literally a whole section on that. But the last kind of aspect of responsiveness or responsive web design is what is referred to as a media query. Okay. So what a media query can do is a media query will apply different CSS in different scenarios. Okay. So for instance, I'm going to open up exercise 4. And I have this page here. Okay. And it has like ingredients for a salad. Okay, let's just preview it. So there's an HTML page. There's some very, very basic, CSS. This is how it looks. There's an image, there's some text, it's red, right? This is how my text previews in a page, a web page. But let's say I was actually going to print this. Okay, so I'm just going to do a print command, Control or Command P. And this is how my page would actually print. Now, if you know anything about printing, you know that it really isn't helpful to, to use color, and it's also not very useful to apply images and such because they're usually not going to print well. So what we can actually do is media queries basically what media queries allow us to do is set properties for how we want this, how the CSS will be applied in different scenarios. Okay. So we have CSS print, which means when a web page is to be printed. We also have media screen, which means when your CSS is presented, when your content in CSS is presented in a device screen, like a laptop or a desktop. And then there's @media speech, which is when your device is going to be put through like a screen reader or something like that. So let's see how this would work. Okay, so up here, this is my CSS. Okay, and I'm going to add what's called a media query. So you use @media, and then you say whether it's being printed, whether it's being displayed on a device screen, or whether it's being done through speech. So I'm going to say print. Okay. Now, this is not a selector. What this is doing is it's setting up CSS if and only if your document is also printed. Okay, so let's try this out. Okay, now if we print something, most of the time it's much easier to print text that's black as opposed to red because it uses less color and you won't go through as much ink. So what I'm going to do is between here and here, these are all of the different CSS that's going to apply in the print scenario. And what I'm going to do is say, well, body color black. Okay. So what's going to happen here is when this is being displayed through a screen, my text color will be red. When it's being displayed through print, like it's going to be actually printed, it should be black. Okay, so I'm going to save and let's test this out. I'm going to hit print or Command P. Oops, I say. There. Okay. See how the text now is black? Okay. Maybe I want the text to be a little bit smaller. It's like taking up an entire page. Okay. So maybe I'm going to make the text a little smaller. So let's make font size 10 points. Line height 14 or maybe 13. But this is only going to apply for print. So let's save, refresh. So the text has gotten smaller, but it's only for print. Okay, this isn't applying in the screen. And then actually, I kind of want to get rid of this image. So actually, what I can do, don't worry about how I'm going to do this, is I can actually take this image and say display none. Display none removes something, so it's not visible. We'll do more practice of display none later. But I'm going to refresh and print. Okay, so see how the image is gone, but only in print. In the screen version, all of that stuff is still here. All right, so that's my media query. I'm saying, okay, when, if and only, if this page is to be printed, follow this CSS. If I want to, and I want to be very precise, I'm going to say at media screen. And then if I do this, this would mean this particular CSS will apply when the web page is being displayed through a screen, aka like a device screen, like a laptop or a desktop or something. It could also be like a smartphone or a tablet or something of that sort. Okay. So, once again, all of this should work because this is being displayed to the screen. Okay. Let's add a little step to this. Okay. So we're going to add what are called breakpoints. Okay. So the first thing I want to talk about is what's called a viewport. Okay. It's called meta viewport content with device initial scale 1.0. Okay, so what is this? Well, essentially, back in the day, by back in the day, I mean like 2010-ish, when the iPhone first became very popular, a lot of websites were not set up to display, a lot of websites weren't set for the web, okay? And so essentially what happened was, the iPhone had very small dimensions. It was like, 480 pixels wide. And so since most websites were much longer, that meant a lot of websites would be cut off. Like this is the website, you'd only be able to see this part of it. So what Apple did was to basically, you may remember if you're old enough, that on the old, what would happen is it would basically shrink the website down so that it would fit inside of the device. So in other words, it would take it and shrink the website to be like this, right? And so you had to do that old like pinching and zooming and all that sort of stuff, right? So that's the way it used to work. Now, these days, most websites are set up for the web, set up for smartphones, but a lot of browsers still default to zooming out, and we don't want that to happen. Okay, so to prevent that from happening, we add what's called a viewport. What this is saying is the viewport, aka the computer screen, do not have the device scale more than 1.0. 1.0 is like the standard default size. Okay, so we need to add this. Okay, I know that sounded a little confusing, but what we're going to do now is we can have a at media screen, and we can add properties to it. Okay. So at media screen means, when your website is being displayed on a computer screen. And then we can add an and property. So if you know anything about logic, what this means is both this and this has to be true. Okay. So what's going on here is this is saying at media screen and max width 600 pixels. Okay. What does that mean? Well, what this means is that if if this web page is being displayed through a browser and that browser is not bigger than or max width 600, apply the following CSS. Okay. In this case, the CSS is the background color being red. Okay. There's also this other one, at media screen and min width 601. Okay. Min width means it has to be a minimum of, in this case, we're saying 601. So what we're essentially saying here is that, well, your browser is going to look at the size of your page, right? And if the width of the page is between basically 1 to 600, it's going to make the background color red. And if it's above 600, so basically 601 to infinity, because there's no cutoff point, going to be yellow. Okay, so let's test this out. I'm going to preview this. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is you can manually open and close your page like this. So you can see that there's a change going on. Okay. Let's do this a little more effectively. What I'm going to do is right click and I'm going to go inspect. Most of the major browsers, so Chrome has this, Firefox has this, I'm pretty sure Safari has this. There's a way to go into what's called responsive web design mode. If you inspect in Chrome, you can click on this thing that looks like a little device, like that. If you're using Firefox, it's the same, but it's over on the right side, okay? If you're in Chrome, you can also enter it by going under, where's it under? View, Developer. I guess you can't do it anymore. You used to be able to go directly, but I don't think they let you do that anymore. At least not through, maybe it's only with, but you can get to developers tools and then get from there. So when you're in responsive mode, like I just was, what this allows you to do is resize your page, okay? So this is actually the dimensions. So you can set your exact dimensions here. So I'm going to set it to 800 pixels. Okay. So this is the width, this is the height. So at the moment, you can change the size here. I'm just going to blow it up. Okay. This is 800. So it should be yellow because anything above 800 or 60, anything above 601 should be yellow. As I drag this down, so you can watch this number change. I'm at 601. Once I hit 600, it should turn to red. Because what this is saying is, well, if it's 600 or below, it should be red. If it's 601 and above, it should be yellow. Okay. So you can use this to kind of look at the different elements here. You can actually even see, you know, you can, if you want to try out you can try out your device in different settings here. So actually I went under edit here. There's all these various, although to be honest, a lot of these are older, so you may want to update. You can also add a custom device and put in the exact dimensions that you want in the pixel aspect ratio. Excuse me. What I'm going to do is go up here. This is Chrome, and I'm going to actually go to where it says show media queries. what this allows you to do is this actually shows you your breakpoints. Your breakpoint is when your design changes, okay? So you can see I'm in this orange area here. So basically from here onward, that's one design. And then when it goes below, it breaks and it changes the design, okay? Now in this case, I'm changing the background color, but I could also change other aspects as well. So maybe, I could change. So what's actually happening here is Courier is being applied to both the, anything that's not in a media query will apply to both. So notice that whether it's, above or below 601, everything is still, the H1 is still within, it might be hard to tell. Let's make this green. But it's still, it's still Courier. So this is always applying. These things are specific to whatever media query they're in. So maybe I'm going to set it up that if the media query goes smaller, let's set the font to fantasy. So font family, fantasy, save. And I'm going to drop this below, and you can see that it changes the font. Maybe for above it, let's set it to Helvetica. Okay. All right, so let's put all of this stuff together that we talked about. Okay, we're going to put together fluid images. We're going to put together grids, and we're going to put together media queries to make a very simple 2-column layout. Okay, so I'm going to show you what we're going to build. So we're going to build something that looks like this. Okay, so it's a 2-column layout. Okay, as the images get smaller, they're responsive, so they don't overlap each other or break out of their column, even if the page gets smaller. And then eventually what happens is the design breaks down into a single column. Okay, so let's do this. So I already have the page kind of set up for you. So first, make sure you have this viewport. If you don't do this, responsive mode in Chrome and Firefox will not work. Okay, this is my layout, and just you can see here that I have these section tags. Each section has an image of a car and some text about that car. And this is my page as it kind of sits right now. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, let's actually put this in a container. And let's just make this a 2-column layout. So I'm going to say container. Let's use, I'm just going to use grids for this. So display grid. Oops. And let's make this grid template columns. And, 50%, 50%, or 2, 1 FR, 1 FR, something like that. That's probably what I would do. And I'm going to right click and let's preview this. All right, so I get a simple 2-column layout. We've done this before. And what's going to happen is as I, make the pages, the web page itself smaller, what's actually happening here is the page is getting smaller. So these are not allowed to get smaller because, you can see that this is actually happening. And that's because actually these images are not getting smaller. Now you could, instead of using a fraction, you could use percentage. The problem with that is it would kind of create this weird effect where things overlap each other, which is also kind of not what we want, even though it keeps everything in the same page. So what I'm going to do is let's fix this by using responsive media. In other words, I want the images to get smaller when the container itself gets smaller. Okay. So I'm going to make a little class called responsive. Let's set a max width. And I'm going to set that max width to 100%. And let's apply that here. All right. Let's refresh. So I got my 2-column layout, and then as the page itself gets smaller, the images are being responsive and they're getting smaller too. So they're not preventing the frame from getting smaller, and they're not causing any issues with the images overlapping or breaking out of the frame either. So that's great. Okay. Now this technically works, but it doesn't look good. Okay. In other words, like this is very hard to read like this because these are very small columns. In fact, what would be better is if maybe I could set this up where this kind of moves down there and then this moves down there, and we get a single column as opposed to a 2-column layout. But I don't always want a 2-column layout. I really just want the 2-column layout when it gets below a certain size. Okay. So what I'm going to do is set up a media query. I'm going to say at media screen. So when the browser, when this web page is being displayed through a screen, through a computer screen or a laptop screen, and max width 600 pixels. Okay. In other words, the browser cannot be bigger than 600 pixels. Okay. So what do I want to do when the browser is smaller? Well, what I'm really trying to do is change the number of columns that I have, right? So what is it that controls the number of columns? Well, this is what controls the number of columns. It's my grid template columns set up in my container. So what I'm going to do here is for smaller sizes, let's take that container and let's reevaluate the number of columns that I have. So I'm going to change it from 2 columns into 1 column. And so now I got 2 columns. I got, let's look at this from a responsive media position. This is my website at 1200. Eventually what happens is these images come together and they, it gets smaller and smaller until eventually I hit 600. And then once I hit 600, it becomes a 1-column layout. Okay. So this is very similar to what happens with the the Diablo Valley college website, where it's like, well, here we have 3 columns, 1, 2, 3, right? And then as this gets smaller, you can see this has responsive imagery being applied, and then eventually you get a 1-column layout here, right? And this works much better for like a tablet or a smartphone. Now, if you think about it, having the headings aligned to the left side makes a lot of sense when you have multiple columns, right? But in a single column situation, it actually would probably make more sense for the heading to be in the center. So what I'm going to do is, well, I'm going to set up that only in the small sizes here would I change the heading, and I'm going to set the alignment to the center. Okay. And just to be careful, I may also want to set up a above 600 media query. So for any device bigger than 600. So I might say at media screen and min width 601 pixels. I'm actually going to take let's set the container to 2 columns. Okay. And let's set the heading back to left for larger sizes. And the result of that's going to be, well, here's one column aligned to the center, but when it gets, because this is below 600, but when I get above 600, it goes back to 2 columns with left align. Okay. So this is applying everything we've talked about to make a more responsive design, a design that changes, or it, it's optimized for the size that it's in. In other words, like, it made sense when we had a very wide page to have 2 columns, but it didn't really make sense when it was smaller, right? So we changed it to 1 column. So we're trying to reevaluate what we have and make it work for the space and the environment that it's in by just simply changing the CSS, okay?